The silence in Ouagadougou that night seemed almost unnatural. President Ibrahim Traore stood alone by the palace window, his gaze fixed on the sleeping city below. Something in the atmosphere felt wrong, a subtle tension that his years of military training had taught him to recognize. The calm was deceptive, hiding a storm he could sense approaching. For several weeks, disturbing patterns had emerged in the affairs of state. Military operations were being compromised with alarming frequency. Confidential meetings were somehow becoming known to outsiders. Enemy forces were appearing in locations they should have had no knowledge of, moving with a precision that suggested inside information. These weren't coincidences or mere strokes of bad luck. The evidence pointed to something far more sinister: betrayal from within his inner circle. The realization cut deep. Since taking power, Traore had dedicated himself to reclaiming Burkina Faso's sovereignty. He had expelled foreign military forces that had long maintained a presence under the guise of security cooperation. He had renegotiated mining contracts to ensure the nation's gold benefited its own people. He had restored land to communities that had been displaced by foreign interests. Each action had earned him the adoration of his countrymen, but also the enmity of powerful international players accustomed to having their way. Now these external forces were striking back, not with open confrontation, but through covert means, recruiting traitors within his government to undermine his leadership from within. The confirmation came unexpectedly. Captain Naba Zongo, a young officer assigned to routine communications monitoring in the Northern Territories, discovered an anomaly. Hidden within what appeared to be an innocuous agricultural report was encrypted information, detailed military positions, operational plans, and security protocols. Information that only a small group of senior officials should have possessed. That night, Traore convened an emergency meeting under conditions of absolute secrecy. No electronic devices were permitted. No staff beyond his most trusted circle was allowed entry. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating as Captain Zongo presented his findings. When the name at the top of the intelligence report was revealed, several officers visibly recoiled. Colonel Ouattara, one of Traore's oldest comrades in arms and closest confidants. A man who had fought alongside him through countless battles. A man who shared meals with his family. A man entrusted with the nation's most sensitive security matters. He's been feeding them intelligence for months, Captain Dongo, one of Traore's most loyal officers, stated bluntly. The president's expression remained impassive, though internally he felt as though a knife had been thrust into his chest. His response, when it came, surprised everyone present. "No one moves against him yet," Traore ordered, his voice controlled and deliberate. "No arrests, no confrontations. If there's a snake in our midst, we don't kill it immediately." His gaze swept across the room, meeting each officer's eyes in turn. "First, we follow it back to its nest." The days that followed tested Traore's resolve and self-control. He maintained his normal routine, conducting ministerial meetings, holding public appearances, and, most difficult of all, continuing to include Colonel Ouattara in security briefings as though nothing had changed. He smiled, shook hands, and engaged in casual conversation with the man he now knew was betraying him, all while observing every gesture and expression with new awareness. Behind the scenes, Captain Zongo led a covert operation tracking Ouattara's movements. They monitored his communications, followed his vehicle, and documented his contacts. After several days of surveillance, they identified a pattern. Ouattara was making regular late-night visits to a seemingly vacant property near the French embassy, a classic safe house setup. Surveillance equipment discreetly installed across from the location captured the evidence they needed. One night, the cameras recorded Ouattara entering the house and meeting with two men, one American, one European, both with the bearing and mannerisms of intelligence operatives. They handed him a black case, presumably containing payment. In return, he provided them with documents. Later analysis would confirm these contained the president's confidential travel itinerary for the coming month, information that in the wrong hands could facilitate an assassination attempt. Watching the footage, Traore felt his last doubts vanish, replaced by cold resolve. The time for patience had ended. He contacted Captain Dongo with a simple message: "It's time." The following morning, Colonel Ouattara received a summons to a meeting at the defense headquarters. Upon arriving, he found not the usual assembly of staff officers, but a room of stone-faced soldiers in full combat gear, with President Traore himself standing at the center. "You were my brother," Traore said, his voice resonating with controlled fury. "You fought beside me. We shed blood together defending this nation, and now you sell our secrets to those who would keep us enslaved?" Ouattara's composure crumbled. The confident smile that had become his trademark faltered and died. He attempted to speak but seemed unable to form words. "For what?" Traore continued, stepping closer. "Money? Promises of power? Protection? Do you truly believe they will honor their commitments once they've used you?" Captain Dongo stepped forward, placing the black case from the surveillance footage on the table and opening it to reveal stacks of foreign currency, sophisticated surveillance equipment, and a data drive. "You won't be going to prison," Traore informed him, his tone now glacial. "Not yet. First, you're going to tell us everything." Hours later, Ouattara sat alone in a windowless interrogation room deep beneath the Defense Ministry. His uniform had been removed, his medals and insignia confiscated. Behind a one-way mirror, Traore watched in silence, his expression unreadable despite the ache in his heart. The man he had trusted with his life now sat before him as an enemy of the state. Captain Dongo entered the interrogation room, dropping the USB drive on the metal table with a deliberate clatter. "We've reviewed the contents," he stated flatly. "We know which secrets you've betrayed, which operations you've compromised, which lives you've endangered." Ouattara's gaze remained fixed on the floor. "You don't have to speak," Dongo continued, "but consider your position. Now that you've been caught, how long before your foreign handlers disavow all knowledge of you? You're a liability to them now, not an asset." He leaned closer. "We are the only ones who can offer you any chance of redemption or protection." The silence stretched for hours. Periodically, Dongo would return, presenting additional evidence, asking questions, then leaving Ouattara alone with his thoughts. The psychological pressure mounted until finally, in the early hours of the morning, the colonel's resistance crumbled. "They approached me a year ago," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "American and European intelligence officers. They began with flattery, my brilliance, my potential, how I was undervalued in Burkina Faso." He described how casual conversations had gradually evolved into offers of money, then promises of a luxurious exile, a house in Paris, a prestigious position with an international organization. "They wanted Burkina Faso back under their influence," he continued. "They said Traore was leading the country to ruin, that his policies would result in isolation and poverty. They promised development aid, military support against the insurgency, prosperity." His voice trailed off. "I believed them. I thought they would protect me, but now I see they were merely using me." Later that day, Traore entered the interrogation room and sat across from his former friend. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You didn't just betray me," Traore finally said, his voice controlled but intense. "You betrayed every citizen of this nation, the mothers in rural villages who finally have hope for their children's future, the soldiers risking their lives on our borders, the young people who now believe they can build a life here rather than fleeing abroad." Ouattara couldn't meet his gaze. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words clearly insufficient even to his own ears. "Your remorse changes nothing," Traore replied, standing. "But you now have a choice. You can help us expose those who corrupted you, or you can face the consequences alone." Ouattara's cooperation marked the beginning of a new phase in the silent war. Under strict supervision, he maintained contact with his foreign handlers, now feeding them information carefully crafted by Traore's team. Each communication was a calculated move in an elaborate counterintelligence operation. False information about military deployments, manufactured internal disputes within the government, and fabricated infrastructure vulnerabilities, all designed to mislead and expose the network of foreign operatives. The results were immediate. Several diplomatic staff at Western embassies were quietly declared persona non grata and expelled. A journalist revealed as an intelligence asset was publicly exposed in the national media. A businessman serving as a financial conduit found his operations suddenly under intense regulatory scrutiny. Burkina Faso was no longer merely reacting to external threats. It was actively hunting those who sought to undermine its sovereignty. At the center of this operation stood Ibrahim Traore, no longer just defending his position, but protecting his country's right to self-determination. Inside the heavily secured communications center, established within the Ministry of Defense, Captain Dongo coordinated the counterintelligence campaign. Walls displayed maps marking known operatives and suspected safe houses. Communications specialists monitored encrypted channels. Intelligence analysts processed incoming information around the clock. Each evening, Traore would arrive unannounced to review progress and adjust strategy. The decisive moment came when a foreign operative using the alias Reed, who had presented himself as an agricultural development advisor, contacted Ouattara with unusual urgency. A meeting was arranged at a safe house on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. The message strongly suggested that a major operation was being initiated. "This ends tonight," Traore declared, authorizing a capture operation. His instructions were explicit: no uniforms, no marked vehicles, absolute discretion. When the appointed hour arrived, Ouattara entered the safe house wearing concealed recording devices. His anxiety was genuine. He knew that if the deception was discovered, his life was forfeit. Inside, Reed waited with another European operative. "You've been less communicative recently," Reed observed coldly. "Is Traore growing suspicious?" Ouattara maintained his composure. "He trusts me completely," he replied, producing a folder containing the false information prepared by Traore's team. "I've brought the details you requested." Reed leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Good. Remember, the timeline has accelerated. The president must be removed before the elections. The current administration can't be allowed to gain democratic legitimacy." Outside the building, Traore listened through a secure audio feed, his suspicions confirmed. This was not mere intelligence gathering. It was a conspiracy to overthrow or assassinate him. He gave the order to move in. The operation was executed with military precision. Special forces breached the building from multiple entry points simultaneously. Within seconds, the foreign operatives were disarmed and restrained, their expressions shifting from shock to fury as they realized their operation had been compromised. "You have no authority to detain us," Reed protested. "We have diplomatic immunity." "Not for conspiring against the state," Captain Zongo replied calmly. "Not for planning assassination." As the agents were secured, Ibrahim Traore himself entered the room, unescorted and unarmed. He wanted to look into the eyes of those who had sought to destroy everything he was building. Reed met his gaze with naked hostility. "This changes nothing," he spat. "You think you've won?" Traore's response was measured, his voice steady. "This isn't about winning. This is about Burkina Faso determining its own future." By morning, news of the operation had spread throughout the capital and beyond. International media reported on the arrest of foreign intelligence operatives caught planning destabilization operations against the Burkina Faso government. Diplomatic channels exploded with activity as Western nations attempted to contain the political fallout. In markets and village squares across the country, people gathered around radios and televisions, absorbing the news with a mixture of outrage and pride. The narrative resonated deeply. Foreign powers had attempted to subvert their independence, but their president had caught them in the act. That evening, as the sun set over Ouagadougou, Traore addressed the nation. He chose to speak from the presidential palace, wearing his military uniform rather than civilian attire, a deliberate choice emphasizing his role as defender of the nation. "My fellow citizens," he began, his voice steady and resolute, "I speak to you tonight not as your president, but as your brother, your compatriot, your fellow soldier. In recent days, we have uncovered and neutralized a plot against our sovereignty, a conspiracy orchestrated by foreign interests using one of our own to undermine everything we have built together." He detailed the operation in measured terms, neither exaggerating nor minimizing the danger. He acknowledged the pain of discovering betrayal within his inner circle, but emphasized that one man's weakness could not derail the nation's progress. "These forces sought to create chaos and fear," he continued. "They hoped to return us to an era when Burkina Faso's resources enriched others while our people suffered. They failed because the strength of our nation lies not in one leader, but in our collective determination to remain free." Raising his right hand in a solemn gesture, he renewed his commitment. I will never sell this country, not for gold, not for false promises, not for personal power. Burkina Faso belongs to its people, and I swear to defend that principle with my life if necessary. We will never again kneel before foreign masters. Never again. The speech reverberated beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Across Africa, political leaders and ordinary citizens alike recognized the significance of what had transpired. A former colony had not only asserted its independence, but had actively defended it against subversion by former imperial powers. Later that night, when the celebrations had quieted and the streets of Ouagadougou had grown still, Traore met privately with Captain Zongo on the palace rooftop. The city stretched before them, peaceful under the stars. You performed admirably, Traore told the young officer. Your vigilance saved countless lives. Zongo accepted the praise with humility. I merely followed your example, Mr. President. You showed us that true leadership means protecting your people, even when the threat comes from those you once trusted. Traore gazed at the horizon in silence for several moments. They will try again, he finally said. Perhaps with different methods, different faces, but the same objective. Those who profited from our exploitation for generations will not easily surrender their influence. Then we will stop them again, Zongo replied without hesitation. As long as we remain united, as long as we remember what we're fighting for, they cannot defeat us. Traore nodded, a rare smile briefly crossing his face. Yes, as long as we stand together, they will never reclaim this land. The president remained on the rooftop long after Zongo had departed, contemplating the challenges ahead. He harbored no illusions about the difficulty of the path he had chosen. Powerful interests would continue to oppose Burkina Faso's quest for true independence. Attempts to destabilize his government would continue in new and perhaps more subtle forms. Yet the events of recent days had demonstrated something crucial, that such forces could be defeated through vigilance, unity, and unwavering commitment to national sovereignty. The people of Burkina Faso had tasted genuine independence, had glimpsed the possibility of controlling their own resources and destiny. They would not willingly return to subjugation. As dawn approached, Traore finally turned from the view and descended to prepare for the day ahead. Men like Ibrahim Traore did not have the luxury of extended rest. The work of building a truly independent nation demanded constant vigilance, unflagging energy, and absolute dedication. The lion had defended his territory this time, but the hunt would continue, and he would be ready.